This is an oral history interview conducted for the Witness to War Serving a Nation project at Nauset Regional High School on Cape Cod, Massachusetts. For the sake of this interview, please state your full name and community in which you now reside.
My name is Jeffery and I live in Plymouth, Massachusetts.
Where were you born and how did you end up in Massachusetts?
Well, I was born on Long Island in New York, Garden City. Lived there until I was 9, and then moved to Wellesley, Massachusetts. And just over the years, we wound up 26 years ago in Plymouth. But we had moved around a lot.
Summarize your childhood life and what was your favorite childhood memory?
Well, as I say, we did move around quite a bit. I had one sister and 2 brothers. And as far as my best childhood memory, I guess it was just when I lived in Wellesley, Massachusetts. I was, 10 years old until 17 years old. That was the formative years, and I enjoyed sports, and I had a lot of friends, and nothing in specific, but it was just a good time.
When you were a kid,
I'd like to go back.
When you were a kid, what did you want to be when you grew up?
I didn't know. I had no idea.
What age did you know you wanted to join the war, or were you drafted?
No, I was not drafted. I was going to Holy Cross College, and I was in my junior year, and I didn't know what I wanted to do when I graduated. But I did know I didn't want to go to graduate school, and I didn't want to, go to work for a big company. And I wasn't ready to settle down, so I thought, well, what can I do? So I thought, well, why not join the Marine Corps? And that's how that happened.
Why the Marines?
Well, that's a good question. Most of my friends at school were in Navy ROTC, Reserve Officer Training Corps, and I hadn't joined that. And so, I always had this impression of the Marines as being somewhat different. They were small, certainly far smaller than the Army. And the Air Force didn't seem to interest me. And the Navy, my dad had been in the Navy and he enjoyed it. But the idea of spending so much time on board a ship with so many men or guys didn't really appeal to me. It just seemed confining. So I thought, oh, why not join the Marines?
How did your family feel about you serving in the military?
They thought it was stupid. They didn't like the idea.
How did being a soldier affect your life?
I wasn't a soldier, I was a Marine.
Well, how did
There's a difference.
Yeah.
When I got out of college, obviously I was able to discipline myself to some extent because I got through college and it wasn't that easy. But in many ways I wasn't disciplined at all. And 5 years in the Marine Corps certainly changed my outlook on life, and I realized the importance of setting limits and having objectives and being somewhat disciplined. It made a big difference.
What were the conditions like, such as sleeping, eating, or health conditions?
For me, they were very good. I was a pilot. By the way, did you have a chance to see the video?
Yes.
All right, so you learned a little bit about Cobra helicopters. When I went to Vietnam, the conditions were pretty good. I lived right on the South China Sea, and I mean right on the South China Sea. I lived in what we called a hooch, which was like a cabin, and there were 5 or 6 of us, and I was within 50 yards of the beach. I was within 50 yards of the officers' club. The food was good. It wasn't like I was out there sloshing around in the mud, like most Marines were doing. I had it pretty easy.
What was your ranking and how did you achieve it?
Well, when I was commissioned into the Marines, that happened at my graduation from college. I was a 2nd lieutenant, and then I followed the normal progression. I became eventually a lieutenant, and then ultimately I became a captain before I got out.
How did you become a pilot?
Okay, this may take a few minutes. In my junior year of college, I went to officer candidate school in Quantico, Virginia. That was a 10-week, very intensive, very, very intensive course. And when I got out, I was ready to go to Vietnam and win the war. And I was going to be a platoon leader. I was going to be in charge of 50 men. And I just couldn't wait to get through my senior year and do that, go to Vietnam. And then around Christmas time, when I was still in school, my senior year, I started having these nightmares. And the nightmares were always the same. We'd be under attack, and our position would get overrun, and I'd lose a lot of men who were under my command. And I just couldn't stand it. I said, I can't do this. I'm too young. I'm too young for that kind of responsibility. And so I thought, but I have to do something that will be honorable, but I can't do that. And so my friends, I mentioned I had friends in Navy ROTC, and many of them were going to flight school to fly helicopters for the Navy. And I thought, well, why don't I fly helicopters for the Marines? And so I applied, and I took an aptitude test, and so they accepted me. And that's what made me become a pilot. The fact that I didn't want to be a ground officer.
Were you ever in a life-threatening situation?
Well, I never got shot. I certainly had my aircraft shot up a few times. There was one instance where we were on a mission, and the battery in our helicopter caught on fire. And the mission was complete. We were just about ready to head back to our home base, and the battery caught on fire, and we had to do an emergency landing and shut down the aircraft. And basically that whole area was pretty much swarming with enemy. And so we were a flight of 2 helicopters. The other helicopter was short on fuel, so they had to go back to the home base, but they radioed for help, and it was going to be about 40 minutes before they had help come out. And as it turned out, we saw maybe 15 or 20 enemy troops coming over a ridge line, and they saw us, and they were trying to get us. And we had, the helicopter was shut down. We couldn't use that as a weapon. We each had like our own personal weapon, like we had a few grenades, and we had a submachine gun, and we had a pistol, but that wasn't going to stop these guys. And so it became a race on the clock as to whether they would get to us before help arrived. And fortunately, help arrived about 5 minutes, within 5 minutes that we needed them. Another 5 minutes, we would have been captured or killed. So if I look back on that tour in Vietnam, that was probably the closest that I came to a really catastrophic result.
Describe the places where you were deployed and what you did there.
Well, my deployment was Da Nang, Vietnam, Marble Mountain Air Station. That's where our squadrons were located. And as I say, that was on the South China Sea. It was in the northern sector of South Vietnam.
Did you ever develop a serious dislike towards the enemy? Why or why not?
No, I can't say that. I was flying, you saw from the video, those gunships were heavily armed. They were devastating. And the enemy often, they really didn't want us to know where they were. So most of the time we weren't taking a lot of fire. They were trying to hide themselves from us. And and I never had, I always had the feeling it was an unfair fight because we were so well armed. But on the other hand, I also knew that the more enemy we could take out of commission, take them out of the fight, the fewer of my Marines were going to get killed on the ground. So I didn't really have any, I didn't have a hatred for them, no, not at all. They were just young guys like myself doing what they were told to do. And, the only reason I did what I was supposed to do, my job was to protect the Marines on the ground. And so I never really thought about it too much beyond that. You know what I mean? I tried to keep it simple.
What was the scariest time for you in the war?
Well, the scariest time was that time that we had to land, do the emergency landing, and almost got overrun. There were other instances. We were in an operation that lasted about 6 weeks. It was up in the mountains. The weather conditions were horrible, and we got shot at a lot there. But again, we had so much firepower on board that, other than taking some hits to the aircraft, it wasn't all that dangerous. The weather was probably more dangerous because it was bad weather up in the mountains.
So I know you said you were never shot, but do you ever get any other injuries in that?
No.
What is your happiest memory from the war?
Well, my friends. I mean, I still have good relationships today. None of them live around this area, but there's about 5 or 6 of us that keep in touch. We had a reunion down in Pensacola, Florida about 3 years ago, and many of us hadn't seen each other for 15 or 20 years, and it was as if we'd just seen them the day before. I mean, you develop a friendship that just lasts forever.
What event had the most impact on you?
In Vietnam?
Or anywhere when you served?
I met a woman who was to become my wife in Spain when I was on a 6-month naval cruise. That had the biggest impact on my life for sure.
Do you want to describe that?
I don't know. I met her in a bar. After I got back from Vietnam, I had a chance to go on a 6-month naval cruise in the Mediterranean, flying helicopters, Cobra helicopters, off a helicopter carrier. And so we would stop in ports of call. We stopped in Athens for 3 weeks. We were in Barcelona for 2 weeks. And so in Barcelona, me and a few buddies went up to a town called Sitges, and we met these girls that were from England and that were vacationing in Spain. And so, I sort of dated this woman for the 2 weeks we were in Barcelona, and then we made arrangements to meet in France about a month later. And then from there I went to visit her when she was back in England. And then we corresponded for 4 or 5 months, and then I invited her over to the U.S., and then within 6 months we were married. And so that certainly was a defining moment in my life.
What did you miss the most when you were in Vietnam?
What did I miss the most? I don't know, that's a tough question. I mean, I can't say it was a bad experience. It was not a bad experience for me. And the camaraderie was just second to none. I mean, I had some great friends, and I was flying helicopters. A lot of people would do a lot to fly helicopters. It was a real nice way to make a living if you had to be in the service. So I didn't really miss anything. I mean, I was glad to get home. Don't misunderstand. After a tour, I was very happy to get home and get back to my family and everything. But at the time, I just felt I was in the right place at the right time, doing the right thing.
If you could change one thing you did in the war, what would it be and why?
These are tough questions. I don't think that there's anything I would change. I always felt that I did my duty. I was satisfied with my performance. I really can't think of anything that I would change.
If you could relive any moment from the war, what would it be?
You know, this might touch a little bit on the question about what was the worst thing. I think you asked me, and I couldn't think of anything. When I first got to Vietnam, first of all, if you flew Cobras, forget rank, forget first lieutenant, captain, second lieutenant, like that. There were also rankings among pilots. And when you first got to Vietnam, you automatically were a co-pilot. You were the guy that sat in the front seat of that Cobra helicopter. You were also referred to as a bullet bouncer because there was nothing between you and the enemy. You're just sitting out there over this turret. And when I got to Vietnam, I was sort of on a fast track to get to the next step, which was pilot in command. And that's because I'd done very well in flight school. And so they wanted to put me on this fast track. And so they assigned me to this pilot, and we were involved in this mission called Lam Son 719, which was on the Laotian-Vietnamese border. And it lasted about 6 weeks, and I think I mentioned it before. It was the one that was up in the mountains, and the weather was really bad, and all that sort of thing. And I remember one afternoon, there was a ceasefire that was called between both sides so they could collect their dead. And so one afternoon we were just sitting around in our camp, and these South Vietnamese helicopters were landing with dead bodies on board. They had, 10 to 12 dead bodies with each load, and they were doing this for like 3 or 4 hours. There must have been 800 to 1,000 dead bodies that were brought back. And they were obviously overwhelmed getting these dead bodies off the helicopter and onto a truck for transportation back to Saigon or wherever they were going. I don't know. So I was with 3 other people at the time, and we pitched in, and for about an hour and a half, 2 hours. After that, we were exhausted. We were unloading these bodies, most of which were in body bags, but not all of them. This is pretty gruesome for 2 young teenage girls. I don't know if, that was certainly an extremely moving experience for me. I haven't thought about it in a while. It's kind of choking me up right now when I think about it. A lot of these bodies have been out there for over a week. They were bloated, they were falling apart, and we were trying to get all this stuff off the helicopter and onto trucks. And I guess, you see something like that and you think, this is so futile. What is this war all about? These are just young guys like I am. They must have families. Anyhow, if I could do it over again, it was probably one of the more. It's something I'll never forget. Maybe I would prefer it if I had never experienced that. I don't know. I'd have to think about that a little bit more. But you asked me what I would change. Maybe if I had it to do over again, I wouldn't be there. I wouldn't have done that. I don't know. It was an awful experience.
What was the weather like in Vietnam?
Well, they had rainy seasons and they had dry seasons. Beautiful country. Beautiful topography. There was, they had the South China Sea, so you had ocean, you had mountains, you had, green, plush agricultural areas. So there was a lot of diversity within the country. It was very pretty, a very pretty country.
How did you feel when the war was over?
Well, it was announced that the war was over in when Henry Kissinger and Richard Nixon signed the Paris Peace Accords, and that supposedly was going to take care of everything. But I pretty much knew in my mind it was just a matter of a year or two before the North would overrun the South, and it would become a communist country. So I wasn't very satisfied with the outcome. It was very much of a political war. The United States could have won that war and could have won it fairly simply, but politics got involved, and many times we couldn't complete our mission because we just didn't get the clearance to do what we were supposed to do for political reasons. So I didn't feel that good about it when it was over, because I didn't think it was peace with honor, which is what they were saying it was.
What is the first thing you think of when you hear the word Vietnam?
I think it's just the brotherhood, the camaraderie I had with other people. I don't have any real negative feelings about it. Yeah, I think that was the biggest thing.
Describe what happened when you came home.
Well, I didn't experience what a lot of people experienced. Some people report being spit upon and having other problems. When I came back from Vietnam, I went right to Marine Air Station in New River, North Carolina, the biggest Marine ground base in the United States is in Camp Lejeune, North Carolina, right next door. So I went back to a military town, and everybody there was pro-military. You didn't run into the kind of stuff that other people ran into in other parts of the country. So it basically was a good homecoming for me.
Do you regret any decisions or actions you made in the war? Explain.
No. No, because I didn't really make that many decisions. Most of the decisions were made for me, and I was given orders to do particular things. I do recall one instance when I was pilot in command, and we were on a mission, and we just happened to see off in the distance a bunch of Viet Cong emerging from a tunnel. They had tunnels all over that country. And they saw us, and they started running across the rice paddies. And we asked for, there were probably about 25 of them, and we asked for clearance to kill them. And we got the clearance, and I felt badly about it, because we would have been shooting them in the back, essentially, as they ran across the rice paddies. And thank goodness this happened. We had some sort of an electrical failure to the fire control system. All the circuit breakers popped out, and we weren't able to fire rockets or machine gun. And I don't know how that happened, but it couldn't have been at a better time, because I probably would have left Vietnam feeling very badly about that one incident.
How does the war still affect you today?
It doesn't really. I know that there have been many veterans that have had difficulty putting their war behind them, whether it be Vietnam or one of the Gulf Wars or the Korean War or whatever. When I came back, I just decided I was going to move on with my life. I could have stayed in the Marines, but after 5 years I decided to get out. I've maintained contact with, as I said before, some of the people I knew in the Marine Corps. But I don't have any regrets about it. I look back with a certain level of fondness, really. It was a nice 5 years. I told my boys this. I have 3 boys, none of which ever went in the military, but I told every one of them I think the military is a great place for a young man or woman to start.
When you tell someone you served in Vietnam, how do they react?
So many years have gone by now, and you hear a lot of people say, I thank you for your service. It seems to just roll very easily off the tongue. I don't expect people to say anything. I mean, I just did my duty, and it was just that time, but I don't hang around with people that are anti-military. I just don't. So I don't hear people being critical of my service.
If your grandchild came to you saying they were considering the military, what advice would you give them?
I would encourage them. I definitely would encourage them. Young people join the military for a number of reasons. It's not always patriotism. I just know that for a fact. It could be that they're having difficulty finding a job. It could be that they really want to travel while they're still young. It could be so many different reasons. And it doesn't matter what the reason is. It really is. I rarely run into people that have bad experiences in the military. Most of them, when they look back, will tell you they had a very good experience. And so I would never discourage a grandchild from joining the military. I certainly wouldn't push them to do it, but if they were inclined to want to do that, I'd say fine, go for it. I don't know if I'd have them join the Marine Corps, maybe the Air Force or something, or the Navy.
Describe your life after the war.
Well, I told you I got married, and we had 3 boys. We had 2 boys born in Iran. When I left the Marines, I went to work for Bell Helicopter, and they had a very large contract in Iran. That was when the Shah of Iran, the king of Iran, was in power, before your time. And then at the end of 5 years, he was thrown out of power, and we were thrown out of the country. But we had 2 boys born there, came back to the States. I took a job with Hughes Helicopters in Kenya, which is in East Africa. It was a wonderful experience. We were there for 4 years, and we had 1 more son born. Then I came back to Marblehead, Massachusetts. We had a house there, and I flew out of South Boston commercially, doing commercial flights. And then I gave up flying back in 1989. Did a few things here and there, and then I finally got into municipal finance, like your mom is doing right now.
How do you feel about movies about the war? Do you think they portrayed the war correctly?
There's been some movies that have been anti-war, and there have been some movies that have been pro-war. So it's really hard to say. Technically, I think most of them are pretty accurate. I'm not a person that really loves watching war movies, but I don't dislike them either. It's not much of an answer, but that's about all I can give you.
How do you feel about your enemy today?
My enemy? You mean the Vietnamese?
Yes.
The United States has become much closer to Vietnam, and I have no problem with that at all. They still technically are a communist country, but I don't think they're anywhere near as much aligned to China as they once were. So I don't know. Back in those days, there was what was known as the Red Scare, and Americans were terrified of communism. The Soviet Union, China, they were afraid that they had what was known as the domino theory, where if one domino fell, the next domino would fall, and the next domino would fall, and then eventually you would have world domination by communism. Well, that hasn't happened, and it's unlikely to happen because most people realize that communism is not the answer. So, their country was torn apart. Hundreds of thousands of them were killed. They paid a steep price for that war, as did the United States. So I don't have any animosity towards the Vietnamese.
What is your happiest memory after the war?
After the war? I don't know. I'd have to say that I'm very happy that my wife and I were able to raise 3 boys, and they've all done very well. I've managed to live a pretty decent life. I'm very lucky.
What are some important life lessons you learned from the war?
To keep your head down. Life's lessons. How are we doing on time? These are tough questions. We doing okay? Well, I don't know. I was a young man. I guess I came back with probably When I went to Vietnam, I thought I was indestructible, like most young people. I thought other people died and that would never happen to me. And when I was there, I realized that some people die and some people live, and it's largely a matter of luck more than anything else. And so I realized that war is a very serious thing. I didn't realize how serious it was when I first joined up. But a very serious thing. You know, I had friends that were killed, and you know, that was devastating for their families. So war is something that shouldn't be taken lightly, that's for sure.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, thank you.